This is Metro Week. Our top story, the Tucson municipal bus strike. In the second week of interrupted service, we'll delve into the issues between Tran and the Teamsters Union. We'll also interview a city councilman and an advocate for bus riders. Then, our roundtable of journalists analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Christopher Conover in for Andrea Kelly. Hundreds of Tran workers are in the second week of a strike for higher wages and better working conditions. Andrea Kelly begins our look at the issues.
We are the union! We are the union!
The Teamsters Union says it asked Tran for stronger driver safety measures after nearly 24 assaults on drivers in the last year. The union also says mold growing in the Northwest Maintenance Facility has spread to buses and is a health hazard for employees and riders. It also wants wage increases of at least 75 cents an hour for drivers in their first, second, and third years on the job, and to unfreeze wages for all drivers. Tran says it is working on the mold and driver safety issues, and that it agreed with the union regarding driver safety recommendations during the negotiations. The company is offering a wage increase of 50 cents an hour for entry-level drivers only. The company says the Teamsters request would cost Tucson taxpayers $20 million in the next 3 years. Tran is running a limited schedule of select bus routes Monday through Friday, using managers and other non-union workers to drive. No buses are running on weekends, and thousands of people are being left to find alternative ways to get to work, school, and around town. Hundreds of bus drivers, maintenance workers, and fuel operators are on strike. The walkout does not affect the streetcar, the Sun van service for the disabled, or the shuttles.
Tucson spends tens of millions of dollars to operate the bus system every year. This week, Andrea Kelly interviewed City Councilman Steve Kozachik and Brian Flagg, who heads the Bus Riders Union. They disagree on the details of city funding for the bus system.
I want to talk about where you both are on the budget for Tran. Brian, you have suggested that the city should take more money from its general fund to better support the bus system. And Councilmember Kozachik, you have said the council should consider raising bus fares or changing bus fares so that there is less pressure on the city budget. Is there any room for agreement between you guys or compromise about how the whole system is funded?
Start? Sure. Well, I think there needs to be solutions, like a dedicated funding source for transit would be good. But in the meantime, I don't think that you have to take money out of transit to balance the budget. And when you're doing that, you're balancing your budget on the backs of largely poor people. And this is the 6th poorest city in the whole country. And there's got to be a different way, especially with the mayor and council that we have. This isn't Mesa, this isn't Scottsdale, Paradise Valley. This is Tucson, and the voters support taking care of bus riders, of poor people, and we need leadership from the council to make that happen.
And this is a transit-friendly mayor and council.
Yes.
Unfortunately, what happened last year was Fitch came in, a bond rating agency, and they correctly said that you, mayor and council, have a structurally unbalanced budget. And one of the reasons for that is the cost of transit. We cannot continue to dip into the general fund and more heavily subsidize transit without a corresponding increase in new revenues to offset those costs, or Fitch will lower our bond rating again. And then everything we do will cost more, whether it's police or fire or roads or parks or transit. So our hands are tied with respect to how more deeply we can dip into the general fund. We're already putting over $30 million into the fixed route system right now. And Fitch has basically told us, you dip in more, you need to offset those general fund dollars with some new funding source. Those are fair increases. They don't need to be confiscatory. They don't need to be the kinds of things that hurt the poor. We had a proposal last year that I supported, nobody else did, and that was that we increase the low-income rate by a dime over a 3-year period and roll them in. I think that that's something we need to consider. We do need to increase the funding for the transit system, but the bond rating agencies tell us we're going to drop your ratings again if you don't get your arms around the structural imbalance situation in your budget.
And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget. And this is a transit-friendly budget
Why is this a conversation the City Council seems to have every year or every couple of years? How much money to put into Suntran, how to rectify this so that all the services are offered?
Because this mayor and council has refused to put into place some mechanism by which the fares would increase or decrease based on some sort of an identified metric, whether it be cost of fuel, cost of operations. Look, Suntran has three major cost sources, cost centers. One is operations, one's maintenance, and one's labor. About 70% of their budget comes out of labor. So when the Teamsters lay on the table a proposal that talks about increasing labor costs by over $20 million over the next 3 years, that's absolutely unsustainable, and it's just not a realistic proposal. So the council needs to get our arms around the fact that we need to depoliticize this conversation. There needs to be some sort of a metric by which the fares increase or decrease over time based on some identifiable, measurable sort of a metric, and we just haven't done that. I would support it absolutely if the council could agree on it.
Brian,
Our feeling is that, yeah, this mayor and council is pro-transit, and they're not willing to punish poor people in the sixth poorest city in the country. And so they've taken the tack that more revenue through increased ridership is the answer to finding revenue for the bus system. And I would say that the mayor and council, the local politicians, the powers that be, they just found $200 million for a streetcar. And the city spends $4 million roughly a year on operation and maintenance for that streetcar. If they want to find money, they can find it. We have a whole list of ways they can find the money. It's a matter of priorities.
So the $200 million for the streetcar, first of all, that was a voter-approved project, and the vast majority of those dollars came from the federal government and the RTA.
I think $27 million came from the city, according to
what we have right now is a situation where the general fund is constrained, and we've been told that time and again by the bond rating agencies, and they dropped our rating. And so what we have right now is an entry-level Suntran driver gets free pension, free medical, free dental, free vision. The total value of the package that an entry-level Suntran driver gets is over $46,000 a year. I just wonder how many of the clients that you service down at the Casa Maria Soup Kitchen every day wouldn't love to have a job with that kind of a value.
Yeah.
And so you're standing down on the streetcar line, arm in arm with the Teamsters, who are basically saying, we don't give a rip about the impact of our demands on the table. When that kind of a package is available to them right now, you ought to be marching your clients down there and taking those jobs.
You know, this strike has to be ended as soon as possible because those people that eat at the soup kitchen are suffering. And that's what really needs to happen. And we feel that the mayor and council really need to get in there and crack whoever's heads together and get them to that negotiating table because really it's an attack on poor people to let this thing go on.
why isn't the City Council at the negotiating table?
And so we are prohibited as a governing body or even individually from the standpoint of our positions to get involved because the Suntran system takes federal dollars. Federal government says that if that's the case, if our dollars are involved, the employees have to have the right to strike. Therefore, the Suntran employees are not city employees, and Suntran management is not a city entity. So we have to keep an arm's length relationship from those negotiations. We can't get involved.
And Brian, what can you do to get involved?
Well, what we can do is organize. The reason this comes up all the time is because bus riders are organized and they're standing up for their rights, and they have a mechanism to go in and bargain.
Right now, they don't have
it's
rights.
The union. Well, unions are really, really important in this country, and if everybody had a union like the Teamsters, they would have a living wage and they would have safer working conditions. So the point is not to lower everybody to the level of working for $8 an hour and having 3 jobs with not enough hours.
The
top
top rate is $19 an hour in Suntran. It's a $46,000 valued package for an entry-level operator.
You know, the
Right,
numbers.
we're going to actually have to leave this here because we are out of time for
Okay.
this segment of the show. But I thank you both for coming in. These issues are very complicated, and the limited time you've given us is appreciated.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we'll hear from some of the people who were at the negotiating table before talks stalled. I interviewed Andrew Marshall, the Teamsters Local 104 representative. We asked Suntran officials to join this interview, and they declined, saying they didn't want to negotiate on camera. On our radio side, we've been following this strike on day to day, but can you bring us up to date on what the latest is? And specifically yesterday, you all sent out a news release that said you'd contacted a federal mediator and given them a proposal. So what's in that proposal, and is this a new proposal, or is this the one that was left on the table, if you will?
No, this is a new proposal. The proposal that was left on the table that Suntran keeps referencing was simply the latest proposal that the union had on the table when they issued their firm and final, which we had to vote. That in effect ceased the negotiations at that time, so it really wasn't a proper representation of what the Teamsters and the employees are asking for. So I contacted the federal mediator who was assigned to this case yesterday afternoon, told him that I was going to send him a comprehensive proposal on all the open issues we had and that I wanted him to get that to the company as soon as possible to try and jumpstart these negotiations and get everybody back to the table.
What, in layman's terms, or in the simplest terms possible, what are the changes in this proposal versus what we've seen and what was left on the table?
What was on the table before, Suntran was characterizing as a $20.3 million proposal, that's what it would cost in addition. This proposal that I just gave them yesterday and the committee put together significantly reduces our request and demands for wages and pension, and so this proposal could be valued at anywhere from $5.7 to $7.7 million, depending on how you address the issue of the frozen wage progression.
I know both sides have said we're willing to sit down as soon as the other side calls us. Why go to a federal mediator and not just take this proposal to Suntran and put it on the table and say we're here?
Good question. The last week of negotiations, Suntran is the one that called the federal mediator and asked that he intervene. So when we got the firm and final, we voted it down 363 to 4 on Saturday the 1st, and then we met with the mediator at Suntran's request on Wednesday the 5th. We met the entire afternoon, and the mediator informed us on behalf of Suntran that Suntran was not going to change their offer. So we have to go through the mediator because Suntran requested the mediator back in the beginning of this.
This proposal, this new proposal, does it deal at all with the driver safety issues, or are those now settled and off the table?
No, those aren't settled at all. The driver assault issue is a huge problem still, and that's something that we've discussed many times at the table. And also the issue of the mold contamination is a very dangerous issue that's still open. The proposal addresses all the economic and non-economic items that we had open, and they're a considerable amount.
I know Suntran is saying that they've already begun mediation on the mold and they're working on driver safety issues, obviously not to the satisfaction of the union.
Yeah, the mold issue in particular has been going on since 2010 when they first built this facility. 2012 and 2013, they called in a testing company that verified that there was a serious problem, but nothing was done about it. They called in a different company just a few days before the negotiations ended. They issued a report that it was that acknowledged the mold but said it wasn't a problem. We still have proof that there's mold on the buses, there's mold in the facility, that it's not been remediated. And not only that, but a professional company has not been called in to remediate the problem. It's simply they're asking employees, management and hourly employees, to deal with the mold without any protection, any safety measures being put in place. So it's a serious problem still.
Now, for our viewers, we did contact Suntran and invited them to come. They turned down that opportunity, and that's why they're not here. We got a question from Twitter, and it said, how does the union feel about raising fares in order to raise revenue for higher wages?
Raising fares or cutting routes is something that the union doesn't negotiate. That's up to the City Council and the Transit Task Force and the Department of Transportation and Suntran. That's not something that's negotiated. We believe that the general fund pays for Suntran right now, and that's the way the city set it up. We believe that should continue. We're not in favor of raising fares or cutting routes because the people most affected by that are the ones that can least afford it and least have the ability to deal with cuts in routes.
Right before we sat down, got another news release from you all. You are now getting ready to launch TV ads. Does that ratchet things up and really put this in the media and not at the negotiating table?
We're not negotiating through the commercials. We're simply trying to raise public awareness because, as you know, it's really hard to get out your message without the editing and the editing that media does. So we already did one round of television commercials highlighting the assault issue, the mold issue, and we've done another round that started up today. So this is the second round, and also the budget issues that SunTran had $2.2 million in 2013 and 2014 that was designated specifically for wages and benefits for the operators and the maintenance employees. They gave that money back to the city's general fund, even while we were in negotiations, and they claimed they had no money. They're claiming that that was for expansion, but I got to tell you, when you can't even pay for your existing services, and then you give money back that was designated for wages, that's a serious problem. We filed unfair labor practice charges for bargaining in bad faith over that issue.
All right, Andy, thanks for sitting down and bringing us up to date as to where we are at this point.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Coming up on Arizona Week, how Colorado's mine spill affects Arizona's water supply.
The dilution factor is so significant that the concentrations would be rendered either in trace amounts or undetectable.
Now our journalist roundtable. Joining me in the studio are my colleague Mariana Dale of Arizona Public Media, Dan Scherer of the Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun, and Linda Valdez of the Arizona Republic. Thank you all so much for joining us. Dan, let's start with you. The communities you cover don't have full SunTran service, but they do use the shuttle to come up here to Tucson, but now they don't have a lot of options once they get here. What are you hearing from your readers?
And that's right, the shuttle service is on a different contract, so it's not affected. So within Green Valley and Sahuarita, you're just fine. But we do have people who come up here for various reasons. At this point, it hasn't really been a big issue. People have managed to get around. The issue might come in another week when Pima Community College and U of A open. Then we could have bigger issues down there because we have more people riding. We hope it's resolved before then.
The shuttle is supposed to expand its service in Green Valley. I would assume this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's going to go farther south. It'll encompass about 6,000 more people, so we'll see if they actually will ride it. And I think it was done because of the opening of the new Green Valley Hospital. About 80% of the workers there live in Green Valley or Sahuarita. But like anything, you have to support it. So we'll see if, when it gets launched here in a couple of months, whether the people actually are using it and whether they can actually expand it, we hope, one day to Amado, maybe even Arivaca.
Mariana, this week you did a story for our radio side on a Tucson resident who's trying to help during the bus strike. Thousands of people having trouble getting around. She's giving rides to people. What's her story?
Yeah, so this is a story about Lynn Knuckles. I actually found her on the online message board Reddit. She is a single mom. She said she lost her job pretty recently, and she was formerly a bus rider. Very recently, just got a car in March, and so she has her little two-door, pretty compact vehicle, and had just put it out there that she would be willing to give a ride to anyone who couldn't get one because of the strike. And so she got a lot of emails. She also just kind of took to driving to various bus stops and asking people if they needed a ride. And more often than not, people took her up on it. And she said she's taken about 50 people as of yesterday to various destinations. And she said it was really a range, and I got to see some of that as I rode along with her. Students on their way to high school, the people who have medical impairments that don't allow them to drive, and also people who are trying to get to their jobs who are reporting that it's taking them hours now to get to work if they can get there at all.
We've heard of ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. I assume she's doing this for free as opposed to Uber and Lyft, which charge.
Yeah, so she was actually formerly an insurance claims adjuster, and so she knows all about the risks that it comes in being a driver for hire. And so kind of doing this just out of her own good willing. She wasn't asking for money from people, refusing to accept money from most people. She said there was one man that left a $10 bill in her car and kind of ran off, and she said she'd be using that to give more people rides, though.
The people she's giving rides to, any similarities amongst them, sharing levels of frustration, as Brian Flagg said, solidarity with the drivers? Did you hear any of that when you were riding around?
Yeah, so the people I talked to were mostly headed to work. One woman was going to Walmart. Another man has a job cleaning floors at a retail store. And you know, they said they understood that it is a struggle to make a living and to want to live in a safe, or to work in a safe environment, which is what the Teamsters have said, is that they've had problems with the mold and the dangers of driving. But they're just very frustrated. especially people who are making less than what some of these drivers are making. A lot of the people I talked to found it really difficult to be sympathetic with people that could be making $19 an hour when they're making $10 an hour and working part-time and barely able to make it to those jobs because of the strike.
Linda, in our interview with City Councilman Steve Kozachik, we talked about the city budget. Is the city budget to blame for all of this?
I don't know if the city budget is to blame for it, but I think the councilman raises a really good point that what the union is asking for would have an impact on the city budget. And he also raises a good point that the council has denied SunTran the ability to raise rates or to look for efficiencies on their routes, and that would help them to raise money that they could put into raises. I think he raises some really good points about that. I think listening to Mariana talk, I was wishing that the people that are trying to negotiate this would show as much goodwill as this woman who's giving people rides.
Is there anything that you see that will break this cycle of going through this every couple of years between SunTran and the drivers?
Well, I think the union is really cutting its own throat with this because, as Mariana pointed out, they have benefits and salary that exceeds what a lot of people have in Tucson. So I don't think they're going to put themselves in a very strong position in the future to negotiate. What the city may need to do is look at a different management structure, maybe bring it back into the government in some way.
And something I had heard is that one reason SunTran might not be as eager to come to the table is that they're not really losing a lot. They're still being paid a management fee from the city. It's adjusted for the gas that they're not using right now, but with it being such a large company, is there really a lot of loss for them not to fix this?
You know, you ask how could we prevent this from every couple of years coming up, and maybe this time around what could help prevent it is the outcry on social media, because the union is not coming off as a very sympathetic figure in this. People are looking at the salary packages and saying, I'd love to have that. You know, I'm afraid my reporters are going to find out what a Tucson bus driver makes and quit and come on up here. So the strike really appears to be trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And I think people are growing frustration, and now we hear them more on social media. Maybe that'll prompt the union to think twice next time.
Let's switch gears. Mariana, it's first week of school, or school is beginning, if it hasn't already, in the districts all over the state. What are the challenges that the schools are facing this year as we launch into this new school year?
Yeah, so majority of districts in the area are back in school now and getting back in the swing of things. And the most prevalent issue I think we've heard about is the teacher shortages, that districts were days away, weeks away from starting the school year and didn't have teachers to staff all of their classrooms. I talked to Dr. Sanchez, the superintendent over at TUSD, the largest area district, and about a week out, they had about 75 spots left that they still needed to fill. And previously, we'd seen a lot of recruitment efforts out of state, the district sending people to teaching colleges and other places. And some districts have walked that back because they find that those teachers don't tend to stay here. And so I did visit one school, Cabot Elementary, and they kind of switched gears and started to look internally for some teachers. One of their brand new first grade teachers was formerly their library assistant, and they really encouraged her to pursue that teaching certification because they knew she worked well with children. And so we'll see. She seemed excited, a little nervous for that first year, but really those teacher shortages were what I heard the most about.
Dan, we're starting to get some numbers on standardized tests, Arizona Merit. What does the data show?
AZ Merit is the new AIMS test, and this is the first time we've used it. 750,000 kids took the test in the spring, and everybody acknowledges that it's tougher. What we have are preliminary results. We won't have the school breakdown till October. What we're seeing is an awful performance. About 2/3 of the kids are underperforming in pretty much everything, in math, in language, in writing, and reading. And so the results are not good early on. So now, let the spinning begin. We've already seen it. And you mentioned H.T. Sanchez, and let me give you a quote that he gave to the Arizona Daily Star as he was looking at the results. He says, "I don't believe educators in Arizona are undereducating 2/3 of the state's students in reading and math." Now, he's like a lot of educators. When the standardized numbers are in your favor, you're trumpeting them. When they're not, you trash the test and you make excuses. Now let's look at the response from Scott Hagerman. And Scott is the new superintendent down at Continental School in Green Valley. And he told us the test is more strict because we were sending kids off to college who simply weren't ready. So what he wants to do is to take these results and try to figure out how we can make the system better. I love the fact that he is not making excuses.
That's a different response, Continental, down in your area. Have we heard from any of the other districts, or is it really just TUSD and Continental that we've heard the most from at this point?
Well, we also talked to the Sahuarita Unified School District, and they're kind of in a wait and see. They want to see how their individual schools break down. They see the value of standardized tests, and I see them too, but they aren't the end all. This isn't really the sum total of what a school is all about, and we need to remember that. These are simply an indicator, and as Scott Hagerman is doing, we need to use that information to make the system better.
Let's go ahead and change topics again. Linda, the roundtable has discussed in the past the city of Tucson's approach to homeless downtown. The latest approach is to fence off the public areas so people can't sleep in them. Is this a realistic approach?
No, it's a ridiculous approach, but it's typical. And it's the county that now is saying it's going to fence off the old courthouse and county buildings. It's an admission that it's not working. And it's also, what Tucson needs, and the county should be working with the city on this, they need a compassionate solution that deals with the problem of homelessness, but they also need a solution that respects the community. And fencing places off or closing parks or allowing people to wander around downtown does not respect the larger community. We need low impact, low demand shelters where the folks that are downtown can go and have a place to stay, a safe place to stay.
This week, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals heard an appeal regarding the homeless issue in Tucson about how many things someone who is sleeping in the sidewalk or on the sidewalk can have. Can you explain a little bit about this for those of us who haven't and our viewers who may not be keeping exact score, if you will, on how this issue is progressing?
Well, it actually goes back to the Occupy Tucson movement, because those are the folks that are championing the homeless. They're arguing that at their First Amendment rights, they can occupy the park and they can protest. The city limited them to the sidewalk and tried to control them by limiting the number of possessions they could have. They went to district court. The court said, you can't do that, that's a violation. The city then appealed that to the Ninth Circuit, and that's what's being discussed now, is whether the city can do that or not. But the city subsequently went back to the district court, and the court said, you completely overreacted to the ruling, but now I don't have jurisdiction. So really, the best thing that could happen for the city at this point is if the Ninth Circuit kicks it back to the district court and says, you guys work it out. But it's a national issue, and the Justice Department has weighed in Idaho, saying it's a violation to deny people the right to sleep in a park unless there's someplace else for them to go. So it just gets worse and worse.
Whenever the Ninth Circuit rules, is this the end, or will this be another Arizona case we're going to see in front of the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, it certainly could go there. It certainly could. It just, it is a national issue. It's not over, and it's a national issue because cities have failed to deal with this population.
But it's also an issue of common sense versus, as you say, compassion. I would argue that the bulk of the people who are down there right now need to be picked up by the scruff of the neck and thrown out of downtown. It's the mentally ill who I would have the compassion for. Those are the ones whose needs are simply not being met. But those downtown, we have learned that some of them, I have a dog and I can't get him in the shelter, or I'm with my partner, I don't want to be split up from them. So they are choosing to be there, but why should that choice now hurt the rest of us when they're defecating on the sidewalks and whatever? It shouldn't be. So you need a little hard-nosed approach, but you're right, we are failing miserably, but only when it comes to the mentally ill, I feel.
We only have about 30 seconds left, and I hate to ask this question with only 30 seconds left, but with the city budget and the county budget what they are, is there a simple way to solve this?
they need a low-impact, low-demand shelter, because the people that are downtown, a lot of them are mentally ill, a lot of them have substance abuse problems. They're people that will not or cannot go to the other available shelters. They need someplace for them to go. It doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be a place where they can go and sleep.
All right, Linda, thanks so much for coming in. Dan, Chair, Mariana, Dale, also thank you, all of you, for coming in. As usual, all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media are available on our website. There you can listen to stories, play a live stream from NPR 89.1, and watch past episodes of this and other TV shows. Thanks for watching.